Namaste. Before you watch this episode, I request you please hit the subscribe button and be sure to share with your friends.
Malhotra ji is a wonderful combative scholar. He is a great combative scholar. He has been defending a civilization in another civilizational context. And some of us who are familiar with what he has been doing for years, we know that how hard it has been, and at the same time, how much fear he has put into his opponents of his intellectual strength. The subject that he has chosen today, grand narrative. Of course, the West talks about rejecting a master narrative, but then when you take away their chaff, what they mean is they reject other people's narratives. And their own narrative remains grand. All the great successful countries today, they have a very clear self-recognition. Self-recognition, who we are. We often say, along with Carlyle, that individuals ask themselves once in a while, who am I? But I think communities also, most communities know who they are, but they may reach some point where there is self-doubt, who we are. And in his thesis, India has been passing through a phase where if there actually really was a self-definition very clear, and evidently there was, that self-definition, recalls narrative, that has been either lost or fragmented or subjugated or fractured. And I think the decisive moment of complete fracture was 1193, when Prithviraj Chauhan lost his final battle. And since then, we've been not only been subjugated in different ways. You see, the Atharva Ved prayer, O Mother Earth, subdue those, destroy those who subdue my Rashtra by Shastra or Shastra. This is Atharva Veda, Bhumi Sukta. Unfortunately, by 19th century, we were subdued both by Shastra and by Shastra. And that's the tragedy, or that is the reality. And I have lived through these years where people would often say, when you use the word India, what is India? When you say Indian, what is Indian? If you say, all right, if India doesn't please you, Indian doesn't please you, let me say Hindustan. What is Hindustan? And in any case, the word Hindustan somehow disappeared from the constitution. It was India, that is Bharat. And the name by which this country, these people are known all over Asia, even today, that word disappeared from the constitution. So whatever self-definition you give, whatever designation you give, it has been questioned. I have lived through all these years in this questioning. So we've been asserting, some of us, to, I don't know whether we should call it, revive is not a good word, but restore. Again, restore means complete loss, or reactivate means that it has become somnambulant. It has gone into hibernation, because words and ideas don't die, they go into hibernation. And the seasonal change can bring them back to life. But how this whole thing happened, what kind of fracture, what kind of absence it is that we are experiencing, because our Olympic teams, if you watch our Olympic teams in the last 20, 30 years, they really didn't know what was our dress. Sometimes they wear a turban, sometimes a cap, sometimes one color, sometimes the other color. So there was this confusion. Sir Rajiv ji talks about one Confucius and 300 chairs. I say that India has a philosophy of Confucianism, not Confucius. And we have perhaps more than 100 Confucius, actually, but not one chair. We lost them, forgotten all that. And this Vyatha, this sad story, is the subject matter of Rajiv ji's discourse. He is still in the process of completing it. He has been kind enough to share it before he has completed it and come to Indian Institute of Advanced Studies to, in a way, reinvigorate us and to make us think about this, very serious question, who we are. And we know there are many people who will keep on telling you, you are not this, not this, not this. Maybe through that Nagarjun method of neti, 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 we will reach somewhere. But let's hope. Let's listen to Malhotra ji. I don't want to take any more time. We want to listen to him. He will have lots of things to tell us. Thank you very much.
Namaskar. I'm honored to be invited by the Indian Institute of Advanced Studies to give this lecture in the presence of many important persons, such as Kapila ji and Kapil Kapoor ji and many others. This project is a book project. I'm finishing up this book on the Indian Grand Narrative. It was stimulated by an event in Madhu Kishwa's house some 15, 20 years ago. Madhu must be somewhere here. I think she was. Okay, there she is. So that's the first time I met Ashish Nandi. I had read his book, The Intimate Enemy, really liked it. So there he was. And in the conversation, he was talking about identity politics, this thing and that thing. So I asked him, what is your idea of the Indian Grand Narrative? And to my surprise, he was stumped. And that told me there is something to be done here. He said, when I think of myself, he's talking about himself. When I think of myself, I say things like I'm Bengali, I'm Christian, I'm a post-colonial scholar, and things like that. But the word doesn't come in. That was his statement. So I figured that, if the people who are such celebrated intellectuals as he has been at that time, but especially at that time, are unable to articulate a sense of who we are, then, there is work to be done. Now, I have lived in the US for most of my adult life. I was 20 when I went there, and now I'm 67. So it's one of the most amazing things about that country is its tremendous sense of grand narrative. Every child knows about founding fathers and what happened here, what we did there, what all we did, and the great monuments and the parades and whatnot, It's a very proud country. You can see in the body language the way they carry themselves, whereas we sort of scared, like somebody may see me, And, then I found that in my corporate life, because it was always something international, I was based in the US but working in various countries, I would find that when the corporate executives get together, And after work, they go out to dinner and they get to know each other on a more social level. It's very common for people to start talking about their country and their identity and its history and its culture with pride. So the Chinese around would talk about the Taoism and the Confucianism and all that. The Japanese, while very modern, very scientific in his attitude, would have no qualms about discussing their whole, who they are kind of thing. The Frenchman is wanting to make sure he's not confused as an Englishman. So you might say, कि all सब same ही होते हैं, but it is not true, don't try it. He's very clear on how he's different, what is distinct about him, like that. And never try to tell a Korean that you're saying a Chinese only, It's a big insult. So this sense of distinctiveness in their narrative is definitely there. And these are not scholars, these are industrialists, corporate people. But when the Indian is asked, they are really embarrassed. So they'll say, well, I like cricket or Bollywood. So that everybody will say, Bollywood is your narrative. Something like that. So identifying with pop culture and either ignorant of or alien from what I call deep culture. Whereas I found that the major countries in the world have a very clear sense of deep culture. Now this is a work in progress, and I'm giving a kind of report of my book. I will organize my comments into 4 parts. The first part is, why do we need a grand narrative? What are the narratives others have? Is there such a thing as an Indian narrative? Was there one at one time? I feel there was. So part 2 is disruption of this narrative. So what happened? When did it happen? The whole Islamic invasion, the European invasion, and a very horrible post-independence pseudo-Indian invasion, if you may think about it like that. Our own people probably destroyed more than anyone else. I'll talk about it in detail. And then the third part, I've called it, where are the Pandavas? Which means, where are the people today who are the caretakers of this, who are supposed to be fighting for this? And in this part, I acknowledge, I don't want people to say, Deen Dayal Upadhyay already did this, why are you doing it? Or Gandhi did it, or so-and-so, Dyanan Saraswati of Arya Samaj did it. I acknowledge a large number of pioneering thinkers of the recent couple centuries who have done a lot of good work and thinking to revive and reconstruct our grand narrative. But then, after acknowledging that, I will tell you why much more work needs to be done, why this falls short, why this is not acceptable for us to just go on parroting some great thinkers as if, we don't have any work to do. Actually, we are in fairly advanced state of disarray. And then the final 4th part is the way forward. The book is really a project on that, but I have to do the first 3 parts to set the record. The 4th part is my proposal on what we should do about this situation. So there's a lot of material, and I'm going to, my book I'm going to write in 2 volumes. The first will be a kind of a simple overview for mass audience, and then the second more detailed, in-depth treatment, more kind of scholarly type of work. Because I want the grand narrative to be a topic of conversation by the Aam Aadmi. People have to be engaged. Now, why do we need a grand narrative? You see, individuals have a narrative of who I am. Family has a narrative about itself. There are corporate narratives about, what is special about this corporate entity, its values, what's distinct about its brand. So a community needs a common purpose to exist together, from the level of a family to all the way up, And when you look at different countries that are successful, it's very clear that the grand narrative is a part of nation building. Americans have a official name for their grand narrative. It's called American exceptionalism, which means Americans are the exceptional people of the world. And later I'll ask, is there such a thing as Bharatiya exceptionalism? I'll ask that question. very often I get attacked for merely asking that question by Indians. No non-Indian has attacked me, but the Indians are invariably there attacking me. Just to give you an example, around long back, there was a governor of the state of New Jersey who was very India friendly. So he created an Asian commission. There was a African commission because the African community wanted many things and they wanted representation. And then there was a Hispanic commission like that. So he created an Asian commission and brought one commissioner from each country, like China, this, that. I was the India representative, Indian commissioner. And so then they appointed me to be the chairman of Asian Studies. They said we should introduce Asian Studies into schools and colleges because Asia is the future. I actually made a case like that in the year 2000. It was before this big rise of India, China. This is like when, these things were still like futuristic ideas. So I made a case that the next generation Americans need to understand Asia. Like today, the curriculum is all about Europe because the heritage is European. But the engaging with Asia will be important. So we started this project to come up with this Asian Studies curriculum. And in the meetings, I found that whenever I would talk about all these kind of things about, Asia's contributions to the world and the Asian narrative and all that, whenever I would say something favorable for India, there were one or two Indians who would get very upset. Very upset. So why don't you talk about the women they burnt a month ago? Or why don't you put that in? Why don't you put this caste thing here, there? So they were the typical sort of fellows who were very embarrassed about a positive narrative. So what I did is, I called the Chinese guy, the Japanese guy, the Malaysian fellow, the lady from Myanmar, Vietnam. I called these people to my house for a private discussion without these two Indians. And I went around and said, okay, what do you think of this idea? And they all liked it. They said, we have to have a positive narrative. So I had two or three big things, I had one was the expansion of Buddhism all over Asia is a part of the Asian narrative. And they loved it. Like that, I had some things. So I then went to the next meeting of our committee, and I had made this agreement, this understanding that these other fellows from Asia, different other countries, they'll talk. So I just said I want to start this meeting and I want to invite comments. So I'll go from this side, and the Chinese guy spoke very positively about what I was saying, that this Buddhist expansion and the spread all over Asia is very positive, and other contributions we've made. The Europeans are always talking about the greatness of their civilization, and we should talk about ours. Japanese, the Vietnamese, they all supported me. And luckily for me, after that event, these two fellows disappeared. They've left the whole commission. So this has been my experience for a very long time. So don't tell me, sab kuch theek hai, because I have lived this. It is not sab kuch theek hai. We have serious problems among our own people. Now, grand narrative includes true facts of history, fantasy, exaggeration, wishful thinking. It's a narrative of all that. It's like when you have a brand of a company, they don't tell you that drink Coke and it consists of gas and caffeine and color and will kill you with diabetes. Sir, sach bolna padega. It is not like that. This is part of promoting oneself in this world which is competitive. So there is nothing ashamed about the fact that people's grand narratives are a positive projection. There is a positive reason for why we are together as a nation, and this ought to be celebrated. There's nothing embarrassing about it. So now the American exceptionalism is a very interesting idea, which spans the left and the right. You see, you may think that only some right-wing chauvinists will be like that, but you look at very liberal left-wing, by American standards, liberal left-wing, okay, which is to be leftist in America is not the same thing like in India, They are very patriotic. The American exceptionalism is a part of all the liberals, the Democrats, the Republicans. It is like a common thing that everybody subscribes to. Every American president, before he gets elected, has to go around showing he's a good Christian. Barack Obama, you would say, okay, he's the most liberal left-wing guy. He announced his presidential candidacy that I'm going to run for, and on the front of his church. It's like a CPM leader announcing his candidacy for the election, standing in front of Birla Mandir and saying, this is who I am. It would be equivalent to that, because this is a very left-wing president. But he has to say this. And the other common denominator is they have to be very, very pro-military. That either I have fought in the military, or if I didn't fight, I'm one of them. The patriotism is very strong, and you'll find this true everywhere. But we have a problem. We really in India have a problem on this. China has a goal. They have several hundred Confucian institutes they will have, which are promoting the Chinese grand narrative worldwide, and the goal is in 2 years they'll have 1,000. They'll reach 1,000. And when they set a goal like that, they have achieved these kind of goals. So now it's like 700, 800, and so their grand narrative starts with Confucian, Taoism, Buddhism. They acknowledge. When they became modern, they're very clear in saying our modernization is not westernization. We have a Chinese modernity. Like there is a Western modernity, there is a Chinese modernity. They go on and on talking about it. Whereas in India, we have this confusion कि आपको modern बनना है तो tradition छोड़ो. आप traditional है तो आप modern नहीं है. We are really confused. Actually, if you think about it, in our civilization, traditional, modern and postmodern are all coexisting without a conflict. We don't have a linear chronology which says that you kill one, destroy the books, supersede it with the next stage, and then kill that and fight and destroy it and then come up with the next stage. So we do not have discontinuity in the transitions. We have these things flowing together. So to say that you should be modern, therefore you have to reject tradition, is a very kind of a wrong idea for us. But that is how the reality is. So I studied the narratives of many cultures for the last 15, 20 years. Because I live overseas, so it's very important. And in my business, wherever I used to go, I would go to Poland, and I had business there. I'd go to Germany and Japan. I would always want to understand their narrative as seen by them and engage with them in that level. And the business is good. This is something Indian corporate people need to understand. Understand your grand narrative with pride, and understand the other side's grand narrative, and have mutual respect at the level of deep culture, and you'll actually do better business also. Rather than this very superficial, we just talk business in a certain very legal and financial sense, and there's nothing more deep about it. This is a kind of an inferiority complex our people have. The Islamic grand narrative is a very interesting one. It also claims universalism, like the Christian narrative and the Western Enlightenment narrative claims universal applicability. So does Islam. And then the Islamic narrative are also various kinds. There is the Shiite Sunni, we know. There's also many sub-schools like Ahmadiyyas and so on. They have their very clear grand narrative. And the interesting thing I found in my travels is the Arab version and the Iranian version are very clearly at odds with each other. And in a research trip I made to Turkey, they made it a point to tell me that do not mix us up with either Iran or Arab. We are Muslims, but we are Turkish Muslims. A very, very clear sense of Turkish Islam grand narrative. And this is very interesting because the breakup of East Pakistan was over the grand narrative. Sheikh Mujibur Rahman ran on the platform that Bengali Muslims don't want Urdu. That is it. That was the whole issue. We do not want Urdu as a national language. We are Bengali. We are Bengali Muslims. So this Bengali Islam grand narrative could not be accommodated by Pakistan, and hence they broke up. And if you go to the Islamic countries east of India, Bangladesh to Indonesia, the majority of world Muslims there. That's the region with more Muslims, because so much in Indonesia, so much in Bangladesh. And these, in India, served as a buffer between what is West and what is East within Islam. The East of India Muslims are very much in their own language. In Indonesia, I had company there, and a lot of these people, they're named like Sita and Ram, and they're Muslim people, they had these kind of names, and I was very confused. So I started understanding, who are you, what is your narrative? So claim that their heritage is a lot of Indian content in it, later infusion of Chinese content, and later infusion of Islam, but Islam converted us as a religion but not changed our identity as a deep culture. So they have no qualms about this kind of narrative. So one of the things we have to sort out in this book project is where do Indian Muslims fit in with respect? They are part of our grand narrative. With respect. With mutual respect. So I'm attacking some very complex issues. I'm not excluding people, and nor am I promoting the kind of a khichdi of all kind of things and nothing common. I want a common, deep-rooted framework which is an open architecture that accommodates respectfully the faiths that originated elsewhere. So this is a very I'm going to propose in my book some novel ideas, and therefore I expect to be attacked, because that's what a novel idea is supposed to do. So I might be criticized from all sides, because I'm not going to go left, right, this and that. I think the unity of India can be a wonderful thing within the Vedic framework, while at the same time also giving respect to non-Vedic originated civilizations. But there are certain caveats which I'm holding back for now, but I will put them in my book. There are certain caveats for mutual respect. There has to be mutual. So the predominance of your sacred land over some other holy land are some of those non-negotiables that, in my opinion, are very important. And as long as your loyalty is here and not elsewhere, there is no issue of respecting each other. So I'm working out all those things. Now, Pakistan is an interesting case study on conflict of narrative. There is the Pakistani who believes that they are people from Middle East, and they are the Ashraf. They are Middle East people. They are either Arabs or Persians or Turks. And so I have friends, Pakistani friends, and they're constantly saying, "Humne DNA test kiya, hum to wahan ke hain," like that, which is not really true. So then there is this idea that we are actually from the Indian subcontinent, and we became Muslim. And of course, then there's an inner conflict why we became Muslim. How can we hate these Hindu kafirs because our ancestors are Hindu? How can we hate our own ancestors? So there's an inner conflict of my faith versus my ancestral faith. And so then an argument can be made, okay, because I converted because there was an abusive caste system, so we blame the ancestral faith, and the Muslims came to rescue me from the horrors. So that becomes one kind of a narrative. So there are, soon after the events of 9/11 in USA, suddenly the Pakistanis were very interested in bhai-bhai with Indians, because they were being beaten up, and they figured, okay, now we'll call ourselves Desi. A new term came up, we are all Desis. And in campuses and everything, this new Desi club and all, new kind of hybrid identity, because then they felt ki chalo hum bhi bach jayenge, because we are in trouble. So if you go deep and penetrate, you will find that this is an unresolved issue within Pakistan. Who are they? Because if they are Indians who converted, then they're just like Indian Muslims. What was the justification for a partition? So to justify the partition, there has to be something un-Indian and anti-Indian in their narrative. And they have to reconcile what it is. The easy way out to have an un-Indian, anti-Indian element in the Pakistan narrative is to say we all came from the Middle East. Because then you can say, hum Middle East se aaye hain, wo log yahan ke local log hain. And so this resolves the issue. But of course, they also know this is all fraud. They also know that. They'll tell you that also. So then I looked at I will go through quickly, Japanese narrative, which is easy because of the homogeneity of race and language in the Japanese system. Then there's this German narrative. Now, Germans invented this Aryan idea for creating a grand narrative for themselves. It is not like they wanted to create problem for us. German didn't want to create any problem for us. They were not colonizers. They needed a common basis which was proud, which would be... You see, in those days, what they taught in Europe was the greatness of French. They are the keepers of the Renaissance. You know, they inherited the Renaissance. Highly sophisticated people. British, they have the empire. You know, and their narrative, they have English being spread, and French have French being spread, and the English claiming to have invented democracy, modern democracy, and all kind of things, and this great empire. So they have a narrative about themselves. The French have a narrative about themselves. The Germans were being talked about as barbarians who came and destroyed civilization. That is the German self-image. So they needed a positive. And this discovery that their language is very close to Sanskrit was a very big opening. So a huge explosion of Sanskrit studies and Indology and all that starts. It's very interesting if you look at the history of Indology within Britain. Of course, you know, because the East India Company needed it, so places like Oxford and about 20 other centers were created for a particular political reason. But you find it very interesting how Europe started Indology chairs. The first, Germany was at war with France, and France was at war with England. Now, the first German to get a PhD in Sanskrit goes to France to get a PhD in Sanskrit. So it's like, you know, an Indian wants some doctoral degree, he goes to Pakistan and he gets a doctoral degree in that subject. It's an enemy country. So these early German Indologists were trained in France. And then they came back, and their initial views were that we are the descendants of Indians, not the other way around. That we, the Germans, are the descendants of Indians. That was the early theory for like 20 years, before Max Muller. Very interesting. I have a whole thing on that also, the whole history of Indology. I'm writing another book on history of Indology, right? Because it's never been written. So that's a different book. Now, why is it that the German goes to France? How does France have a center? This is a very interesting story. The French and the English were having war in India over territory. There was French army, English army, Dutch, this, that. They were fighting at that time. And so the French captured some English prisoners of war. And to prevent them from escaping, because if you keep them local, wo bribe deke bhag jate hain, they escape and all that. So they would ship these prisoners of war to France. So the English captured prisoners of war were shipped to France. And when they were shipped to France, they looked at them in detail. One of them was actually not a soldier. He was a Sanskrit scholar, English Sanskrit scholar, who was in India doing some research with Pandits and collecting manuscripts and all those things. And he was part of the English conclave, and he got captured also. So they found, okay, he's a useful fellow, he knows Sanskrit. So they actually made him a professor in France. And that's the start of Sanskrit studies there. And then people from around Europe coming there to study Sanskrit and take it back to their country. So it's a very, very interesting story, all of these things. So the whole Aryanization of German identity comes after all this. There's a period of romance. It's a romantic India. And this idea of Aryan, Max Muller comes up with. And Max Muller is German, but working for the East India Company. He's paid by the East India Company. When he launched his famous books, it was hosted by Queen Victoria. That's how big it is. It's like Rashtrapati coming and launching your book. Kya baat hai? I mean, this is like about the whole empire, the whole story of the empire. This guy is giving them in a way that is a very big weapon, very big device. And of course, we celebrate this Max Muller Bhavan here, there, everywhere and all that, you know. So, then this Russian identity, Russian grand narrative, if you really look at it, Gorbachev and Margaret Thatcher had a very good relationship in which Gorbachev told her that, you know, we are all European people. We are white, we are European, you are white. Why are we fighting? Why are we on the wrong side with each other? We should be one. And Margaret Thatcher convinced Reagan that you should talk to this guy, he's different and you should work it out. So then Reagan and Gorbachev work it out, and then all these things happen in history and all. So when Soviet Union collapses, Russia comes, then they feel that the West let them down. They dismantled, hoping that we'll be part of NATO, we'll be part of European Union. They were denied. Now that's a whole separate politics, why they were denied. Because US doesn't want a rival big country. If they're all little countries, US can dominate the West. But if Russia is also part of the West, it's a different problem. So Russia feels left out. There's a kind of, okay, now this narrative is, we are very proud Russians, we have great heritage of our own. We have not been properly admitted to the Western club. See? So there are all these tensions and conflicts that happen. I gave a talk about 10 days ago in the British House of Parliament. Many of you might have watched the video. If you haven't, I really recommend that. I think it's a very powerful, very important message, going right into the lion's den and telling them a lot of things. So the topic was post-Brexit, Britain. What should it do? How to relate to India? What is its narrative? Because the Brexit is a crisis of narrative. Are we Europeans or are we non-European British? Who are we? And this crisis of narrative tipped in the other direction. So now that we are not Europeans, we are British. Okay, so hamare dost kaun hai? Who are we allying with? We are not in alliance with Europe. Should we align with India? Should we have alliance with China? Who do we align with? So this is a crisis of narrative they have. And I gave them my advice, what you should do. So now the question of, does India have a grand narrative? And this is a very long topic, and I only give you a little glimpse of this. There is a narrative of cosmology, rhythm, as the ultimate thing. Everything is rhythm, and it's a manifestation of rhythm at various levels. And my alignment with this rhythm is my yagna. The symbolic yagna is done with the fire and all that, but there is also an inner yagna, and yagna of my actions, alignment with this rhythm. Then there is this sacred geography, Matribhumi. That is a part of the narrative. There are these tirth places, there is sacred river and mountain, and there is sacred everywhere. You should know the difference between sacred and holy. Islam has nothing sacred, but they have holy lands. Please don't tell them that Quran is a sacred book, or Kaaba is sacred, or your mosque is sacred. It's considered sacrilegious. Because sacred means the divine is present in this matter. So the divine is immanent, not transcendent, but immanent in that context. In Islam, it is absolutely blasphemy to say that Allah is immanent. Sir, aapke dil mein bhi Allah hi baitha hai? Don't say that. He can think about Allah. He can reflect about Allah. But he cannot say that Tattva Masi Aham Brahmasmi. He cannot say Aham Allah. It is not sanctioned. So the lands where the grand narrative of Islam took place are special for narrative purposes, not because today there is divine presence there. This is why a mosque is not a sacred place. There is no equivalent of an Ishta Devata. There is no equivalent of Pran Pratishta. Please understand these things. And this is not some saffron talk and all that. This is a Muslim will tell you. Indian left is trying to be confused about, kind of dance around. But you get a qualified... See, it's easier for me to do a lot of this research sitting in the United States because there is no stigma, taboo, ye nahi kehna, wo nahi kehna. I can go, I have discussions with many Islamic scholars. And very openly we talk about these things. Very difficult to find a scholar here who will talk about these things openly. Very easy in the United States to talk about, these topics. No taboo on it. So Islam has holy sites, holy book, but not a sacred book. Because then you are idolatry. When you say matter is sacred, has the divine presence, it is called idolatry. This is the definition of idolatry. So if you are confused between holy and sacred, then you are going to run into idolatry problems. This is very important, all of this. Then our narrative, grand narrative, also has itihas, which is a sacred play, a sacred theater in which things are happening. So much itihas. Then we have so many the narratives of Arthashastra, Dharmashastra, social structures. We have narrative of empirical, Laukika, history of science, history of technology. All of these are over and above the commonly prescribed boundary of Indian history. Because Indian history is considered to be the history of kings, kaun aaya, kisne invade kiya, it's the history of invasions, wars, and lives of royalty. But the idea of Indian history as the lives of royalty and invasions and wars is a very small subset of the Indian narrative. A lot of people said, "Ke Rajiv, your next job, your next project should be an Indian history ki book likh do." Some important people keep on promoting the idea that Rajiv Malhotra should write an Indian history book. And I keep telling them that I'm writing a book on the Indian grand narrative, of which the history is a small part. There's a lot more than that. Now the problem I'm really wrestling with in order to finish this book is the distinction and disconnect between Rashtra and Republic. Rashtra has divinity and sacredness in it. It is not just land as in real estate. It is not just a real estate issue. There is divine presence. In fact, the Padmanabh Swami temple in Kerala, which became very famous because they found $25 billion worth of gold, the king said, "This gold doesn't belong to me, so don't think I'm claiming it. It doesn't belong to you, it doesn't belong to government. It belongs to the divine. Because people donated this to the divine, and this is belonging the property of the divine." Now, this is not something unusual because all over India, the king was a custodian of divine property. The property was not his. So this idea of Rashtra, whose property is it? King is administrator. He is like Tata's hires a CEO. He is not the owner of Tata. He's doing a job. You see? So if you have an institution, so the concept that the West has developed, which is a very powerful Western concept that we don't have, and we need to understand it better so we relate to it without compromising our integrity, but we have to relate to it and we have to utilize it, is the concept of institution. A corporate institution which is not a personal entity. There is no pran in it. So I sometimes ask the question I ask a lot of troubling questions, so I get blamed for that. So one of the questions I ask all the gurus is, okay, what is the karma of a corporate entity? Suppose a man goes and dumps chemicals in the water and the fish die, so it's karma hai. But suppose Pepsi Cola did it. It's not a person. Pepsi Cola ke atma nahi hai. Uski koi pran. Who gets the account? In whose account is this karma recorded? Is it the employees who did it? Is it the shareholders who got profit from it? Is it the management? How is it done? It's a very interesting topic. So the idea of an institution, and the institution as an entity that has agency, and the institution is doing transactions with others through that agency, is a very central idea of Western civilization. Starting with church as an institution. So Pope is just a CEO operating this machine. The institution is a machine. He's like the driver running the car. So Pope is not like we would say Guru. He's not an avatar. Our people keep mixing up. We are such confused people. Pope ko jaake kehte hai, aap bhi hai, Krishna bhi the, aap bhi the, ye wo. I mean, that is a different category altogether. He's just a CEO. He's only a CEO, and he's not even like a Brahmin equivalent, because he's not supposed to be a spiritually enlightened, learned man. He's a CEO. He's probably closer to a Kshatriya, the Pope, actually. And so this institutional machine which West has created, and then East India Company is a very gigantic manifestation of a huge institution. I mean, they have shareholders, but it is the company. They used to talk about the company like some very big company, Sarkar, like it's a deity and all that. So this institutionalized society is a very sort of important part of Western civilization. Their institutions, therefore, are robust because they worked on it, they perfected it. So when there's a scandal in the church, Pope, it does not crack the church. The church is an institution that goes on. Pope is kicked out, another one will come. We've had scandals like that. हमारे यहाँ के किसी गुरु के आश्रम में प्रॉब्लम हो गया, the whole ashram system will collapse because there is no separation of the guru and the institution. This morning I was having a conversation with a very knowledgeable person who knows our traditional system very well, asking the question that Shankara Mutt, is there a difference? What is the distinction between the Shankaracharya and the Mutt? Can you say the Mutt is an institution? Because the Mutt will live when the Shankaracharya died. Another one will come, like another CEO is coming. So can you say that the Mutt is an institution and the Shankaracharya is sort of the caretaker of that? The answer actually is no. If you look at Sringeri, there is one Mr. Gauri Shankar, who is the CEO of the institution. He is the one who enters into contracts. Shankaracharya does not sign anything. Shankaracharya has no powers. It's very clear because it would violate their principles if the Shankaracharya started doing transactions and representing it for contract, before putting out tax returns, filing things with the government. Shankaracharya has no transactional agency authority at all. There is an administrator called, right now it is Mr. Gauri Shankar, and previously there were others, and all these mattas have a clear separation. This institutional entity has an institutional CEO with the legal powers, and the spiritual authority is with the Shankaracharya. So now the question is, how far can we take this analogy? And we can't take it very far. We can't take it very far because in the Western concept of institution, there is nothing similar to sacredness, divinity, not there at all. So when you have the idea of Rashtra, Desh, they have deities. The asset base belongs to the deity, not to the fellow. The king is not it is not personal property of the king. The land and the gold and whatever is going on is not the Raja's personal property. He enjoys it like you get a job as CEO of Tata's. You can enjoy the good life and private jet here and there, but this doesn't belong to you. It's company property. Similarly, the Raja is not personally in charge. The Rashtra is. So that separation of the CEO and the entity is similar with the institutions. However, the character of what is the Rashtra is different from that of a nation state. And so because the element, the importance given to the divine presence in the Rashtra and in the Desh is there, while in the nation state it is not there. Now, in the early part of the 20th century, when the colonies were all wanting to be freed, the Western countries had many committees, task forces, groups of resolutions on figuring out what are the prerequisites for becoming independent. Who is fit for independence? Fitness to for self-rule was a phrase. Fitness for self-rule. You can't just go to any person say, "Main ko a country banana hai." You can't say that. So they have to satisfy some requirements to be eligible for independence. And these requirements were based on the criteria for nation state, not Rashtra. So the idea that if you want to be independent, you better have a checklist, 1 item, 2 item, do you qualify, can you check off? So this was promoted as the path to being independent. So people like our founding fathers had to go around, had to say, we can become like a nation state. So the people who wrote the constitution were westernized people who understood the concept, what makes us legitimate in the eyes of the West as a nation state. So we can be given respect and we can be given all this stuff, our own independence. This is why the Indian constitution is not, we can use words like Rashtra and all that, but it is not really truly conforming to the principles of Bharatiya culture and our civilization. It is not. So this is a very serious problem. This is a serious problem. This is why it shows up in all kind of conflicts, because the constitution itself is as the bylaws and articles of the institution, not sort of friendly to our civilization. So we have deep structures, starting with the constitution onwards, which are antithetical to the emotions, desires, aspirations of the people. So while we are very proud, we're going to have 8% growth rate and we'll win this cricket match and all those things, the fact is that we are deeply confused and muddled up, starting with the constitution itself. This is very important. A very important missing document is Ambedkar's notes in Columbia University. He went there for a PhD and transformed. How he transformed, why he transformed, who influenced him, remains a bit of a mystery, because when he was sailing back to India, there was a passenger ship. There were no flights in all those days. So there's a passenger ship. And the cargo was put in a cargo ship separately, because they didn't have passenger ship with all the cargo. They had cargo ships and passenger ships. So all his notes and files, many, many boxes and cartons were in this cargo ship, and the Germans sank that. The German torpedo sank the cargo ship. So the archive of Ambedkar that is existing in India is incomplete with that particular era, which would be a very important thing to understand what went into his thinking in developing this constitution. Now, some people, not our wavelength people, but Ananya Vajpayee to be precise, have gotten, using their clout with Columbia University, Sheldon Pollock and others pulling strings, have got permission to open the old archive of Ambedkar, the copies that exist in their file. Because his copies were lost, but their copies, what courses he took and what notes he put and what thesis he wrote, what papers he put in, this, that, are in the archive, and one person is going to be allowed to examine it. So now you will get a new theory of Ambedkar, and we don't have access to the same data to cross-examine it. This is how the game is played. So while there is the Bharatiya exceptionalism narrative, there are competing narratives. There is the Nehruvian secularism narrative of India, which says that our grand narrative is that we are the way the West was, and the West is the way we ought to be. मतलब जो हम हैं वो एक ज़माने में पहले जब वो पिछड़ी जाति के थे, प्रिमिटिव लोग थे, वो भी ऐसे ही थे, और जैसे वो हैं वो हमारा फ्यूचर है. That's the Hegelian theory of linear progression of civilizations, which the Nehruvians have adopted. So this secularism, westernization idea is a competing idea from the Bharatiya exceptionalism. Another competing idea is that there is only a South Asia, which is kind of the Mughal, the glorifying Mughal empire as the true pinnacle and ultimate of who we are. Our grand narrative should be the Mughal grand narrative. After all, they gave us tandoori and tikka and all of these kind of things. So that is our grand narrative. There's a large contingent when they do not accept Islamic colonization. They say colonization is only British colonization. Actually, even European colonization started earlier with Portuguese. And certainly, hundreds of years before European colonization, there was Islamic colonization. If they impose a language, if they impose a religion, if they have jizya tax, if they dismantle your infrastructure, your education institutions, your place of worship, your temples and all that. I mean, how can you say that this is not a very serious disruption? This is a serious disruption, and we should, the post-colonial studies should have the courage to also consider Islamic colonization as part of what's on the table to talk about when we talk about post-colonial studies. But this business of there's a Bharatiya exceptional narrative, then there's a Western Enlightenment secularism kind of a narrative, grand narrative of India, that's the ideal. Then there is this Mughalization narrative, the return of Mughalistan project. I mean, they don't call it like that. But there is such a movement under the current, under the surface. Then there is another grand narrative which says we are all subalterns, there is no one grand narrative. We are all subalterns and we are hundreds of separate entities with separate narratives, and the fellow in Assam narrative, the fellow here narrative don't know have anything in common. Now don't think it is trivial. I gave lectures at the Foreign Service Institute where the diplomats are trained, it's near JNU. And I was very surprised that the first time, I've given it multiple times, the first time there were like 30 people. Young IFS, very proud, we are top of our, So I talked about the Indian grand narrative. They asked me to talk to them on any subject. So I said that this is the idea that you are representing. Like a salesperson in a company is representing the corporate brand. That is his job. You have to sell the corporate brand. Whether it is good or not, your job is to get the best deal for your side. So you are marketing the grand narrative of India, and you will be facing people from China who know their grand narrative, the diplomats, the people from various countries, they all know their grand narrative, so you must understand this grand narrative. Very, very interesting and very surprising to me, a bit sad. After that, when there was a Q&A, the room was divided about 50-50 between the kind of people who were so happy I was talking. They said, sir, ye to humko sikhaya nahi jata, we should be taught this. You should come to this wherever, Masuri or wherever, they're training these people and teach us, because if we go out into the world, we should know how to talk about ourselves, and you are telling us what is pride and all that about our heritage, and we need to know that. But the other half of the room were so cynical about even the concept of an Indian grand narrative. One fellow stood his hand up and said, "Main ye Northeast mein, I am from this community. What do you mean by India? There is no such thing as India in my narrative." So I said, this is shocking. You are going to be the diplomat representing India. The diplomat representing India in the Ministry of External Affairs. And so you see, when they are selecting people, why isn't there a criteria of selection that says, are you able to and willing to and interested in representing our grand narrative? You have a freedom of speech not to be interested in that, but then this is the wrong job for you. I mean, no corporate entity would hire somebody who's VP of sales who openly says, I don't believe in any such thing as our company brand, ye wo plana, I just don't believe in it. आप पेप्सी बेच रहे हैं, कोका कोला भी ज़्यादा स्वाद होता है कई बार, एंड वो कई बार हम ठर्रा पी लेते हैं, कई बार हम दूध पी लेते हैं, and I don't believe in all this. Nobody would hire such a person. Nobody would hire a cricket opening batsman जो कहता है चलो मैंने छिक्का मार दिया, चलो मैं आउट हो गया, उसने छिक्का मारी दूसरी साइड वाले ने, opposing side वाले ने, एक ही बात है, क्या फ़र्क पड़ता है? This kind of muddled up, confused people would never be in any competitive area. So why is it that in the Indian Foreign Service we have these confused diplomats and there's nothing being done? I'm not talking about earlier times, I'm talking about last few years. I've given these talks. So this is the subalternization of India. The subalternization of India. So then all of this leads to what I call the breaking India forces. The subalternization of India combined with this Mughalization of India, combined with this English Fabian socialism of India, these kind of narratives have all found patrons and sponsors overseas. And they love this, they encourage them. These are the new sepoys. This is sepoy 2.0. He's not wearing that fighter and carrying the military weapon. He's an intellectual sepoy. And these intellectual sepoys have a huge amount of power and clout. Now, the idea of these grand narrative projects have been disrupted by Islamic colonization, European colonization. The European colony, when we talk about East India Company, it is not only British. It is of course Portuguese, but there's also Dutch, Danish, Swedish East India Company, briefly Austrian East India Company, 6 East India Company. British was just one of them. So the study of all these is a very important part of what happened to us. It is not enough to just criticize the British East India Company. There's all these other European East India Companies also. And some of the others were much more instrumental in the biopiracy. The theft of Indian botany and plants and plant medicines was very, very big deal for these companies. They existed and they called it spice trade. But it is not a mirch masala spice ke to aapko thoda sa chaat khala denge. You do not build a huge empire on selling chaat in England or Denmark or somewhere. These so-called spice trade were Ayurvedic plant medicines, botanical products of India that went around the world. The botany of India is the richest heritage, one of the most biggest treasures of India in its civilization has been its knowledge of plants, the taxonomy, the classification, the understanding of these plants, how to use them, where to use them. Putting them into daily cuisine as spice is a sort of one aspect, but a very deep scientific understanding of botany is a very Indian thing. And I collaborate. People accuse me कि आप उससे क्यों बात कर रहे हो, उससे क्यों बात कर रहे हो. I collaborate where I can with everybody if I can get something useful. So just because you see me with somebody we should not be talking to according to people doesn't mean that I've compromised myself. So I have a lot of interesting friendships which gave me this knowledge. For instance, it was Michael Witzel, the notorious Michael Witzel at Harvard, who gave me access to a very well-kept archive. One of the treasures at Harvard archive is a book written in Dutch, which in the beginning, this book is on botany and beautiful. See, when they're talking about a certain plant, rather than drawing the plant, they actually have a sample of the leaf stuck there. And then they're written about how it is grown, what is it used for, so much botany. And this book is considered one of the earliest European discoveries of botanical science, European thought. But on the very first page, the author is honest enough to acknowledge that this is a translation from such and such Malayalam book. I had not been able to get a scan of it because they don't allow this, that दिखा देंगे आपको एक translator ला के वो बता देगा क्या लिखा है. But it is, I owe a dinner to Michael Witzel because he got me this insight. So इस तरह से I'd gone around Europe, many places. So much of our heritage is sitting in these places. And I keep compiling, and wherever I get a chance, I scan and keep a copy. And I have got a whole garage I've rented in some storage place, a whole big garage just filled with boxes and boxes of this kind of material I've collected about the Indian grand narrative evidence which is sitting outside India. And it is a sad thing that even today, though HRD people interested, no culture ministry interested, no foreign affairs people interested, even in going and looking at this data about our grand narrative which is sitting elsewhere. Because so much of our narrative is actually the evidence sitting elsewhere. And we are just not, somebody else studies it and tells us what to think of it. But we are not doing this work ourselves. The disruption happens starting 1,000 years back, as Kapilji said. It's been old disruption from certainly the Islamic period and even earlier. But this, we haven't understood and we haven't acknowledged this disruption of our narrative other than for the British. They are easy target. But we haven't gone further back. And it's considered in denial, and it's considered sort of politically incorrect to even talk about it. Now, I'll tell you the post-independence destruction, intellectual. I have a whole write-up, a monograph called The 5 Waves of Indology After Independence. So, what happened is there is Marxism, which we understand, and I have a discussion with people who say, "Jo bhi aap kar rahe hain, what's the point? It's already been done by Deen Dayal Upadhyay." So when Deen Dayal Upadhyay did it, there was Marxism, there was Christianity, there was Islam. But you see, only after Edward Said, there was post-colonial studies. That's a genre of how Marxism morphed. And then further morphed into subaltern studies. And then further morphed into postmodernism, where postmodernism says that all the grand narratives are bad because they are source of oppression and things like that. But they don't apply to their own grand narrative. So when the Indian postmodernist goes to America, is sitting at Princeton University or some fancy place like that, and he's studying all this postmodernism, they love it when he does a case study in his village in India or what has happened to some women somewhere in Rajasthan. And he does all this, they love it, and they give him a first-class ticket to come there, and there he gets some fellowship, some whatever grant he gives and all the huge infrastructure of money, grant and all for people who want to basically undermine the Indian grand narrative, and nothing better than an Indian doing it, especially if you've got a Hindu name, you have a premium. You could sell nicely, get good money for it. So this postmodernism, the interesting thing is, when I go and talk like this about the positive Indian grand narrative in a university, invariably it's an Indian who comes up, raise his hand and start to say, "Aap kya chauvinist hain, aap to saffron mein hain, ye hain, wo hain," like that. And it gives me some rattled out one-liners that they memorized. But when you tell him that, look, Princeton University, where you are in the faculty, was a slave town. And the heart of Princeton, around which the elite areas have been built, but in the heart of town, which is near the university, is where the Guatemalan community, many of them illegal aliens, Mexican community, they supply the labor today. They live. And when you ask, why are these old houses so tiny? The answer, after a few questions your answer is, this is where the slaves used to live. So when the very rich elite used to send their kids to college here, they would be accompanied by a little group of slaves who would live there. So this kind of I tell him कि अच्छा आपको ये grand narrative की deconstruction करनी होगी. These people are very scared. I tell him that you see, a certain authorized, sanctioned self-flagellation in the West is considered good. It is allowed, but it is good because it makes them feel कि हम कितने broad-minded हैं. But that is authorized within boundaries. Ronald Reagan used to have an annual roast the president event on TV, where he would be made fun of. He would be sitting there, and one comedian after another would come make fun of his clothes and how he eats and what he does, and everybody would laugh and he would clap and he would congratulate them. That kind of a thing is an American device to take this, so it seemed like you are done. Ab ho gaya, jitna criticism karna tha aapka, whatever badnami could have been done has been done. So this is a very clever device. So a limited, controlled attack on oneself is a very useful thing for the West to do. And the Indian sepoys are very useful idiots for that. Very useful idiots for that. It is like inoculation. When you get vaccinated, you're actually putting enemy germs into your body. But you're not putting in such a dose that will kill you. You're putting in a mild dose so that it's enough to respond with your own defense and empower your defense, make you stronger. So bringing these post-colonial people from India and all that, India is, by the way, the largest supplier of post-colonial studies. There's no Chinese people doing post-colonial studies. There's no Japanese fellow doing it. Indian ही है, non-Western Indian only. We are the one who love the post-colonial studies and very famous, very popular. हमने कर दिया ये. So this is part of the lack of self-esteem among Indians, and the post-colonial studies people and the post-modern people who are deconstructing all the grand narratives are not able to, interested in, or whatever it is, deconstructing the very deep, fundamental, cultural, grand narratives of the country they're living in, which is feeding them. They're not, that is off limits. And when I come and talk, I'm a troublemaker because I'm exposing this. Ki aap log hypocrites hai. You're learning this Western device of deconstruction and applying it to your own India, but you're not applying it right here. So, for instance, there is this American, it's called U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom. And it was set up during the Clinton era under the U.S. Congress, it reports. And its purpose is to monitor the violation of religious freedom all over the world except the United States. That's the charter. It says that. And they are doing all this, So they recently called me. It's very interesting. They called me in November for a private hearing from me. I will come and listen. Because I'm a very big critic. Every year when they come up with their report, I take the India section and I give a response publicly. And nobody from the Indian ministry want to do it. They don't want me to come and talk about it. Unko sharm aati hai. In other words, they feel that we are better off chup karke seh lo. Chup karke seh lo, zyada bolo mat ke pata nahi kya ho jayega. They are in fear. But China, within 2 weeks after the report comes out, they have their own report on human rights violations of the West. Because they have an active project going all the time. So, wo taiyar unka masala. So, the idea of Kapila ji is such an honor. मैं आपको मिलूंगा before I leave. I want to discuss this. So the narrative project, I see this postmodernism as a kind of a weapon for export of this disruption. You can export these to other countries, but not domestic consumption. Americans are not, in India we rejoice and celebrate our postmodernist, and he goes to this literary festival, he's a big shot, ye wo, plana, ho gaya. But in the United States, there is no American, self-flagellating kind of person who's given too much time on their media. Hardly media, So, if you take these ultra-left type people, they are not figures. You don't see them on CNN or Fox TV or MSNBC, or you don't see them. There is no Sardesai type fellow who's bringing these kind of fringe people, giving them mainstream status. The mainstreaming of the anti-narrative, think of it as the anti-narrative. The mainstreaming of the anti-narrative is so fashionable in India. I don't see it fashionable in other countries. It exists. You can give me examples. So like when I criticize that, why are they criticizing, why is the Ivy League talking about all this Freudian psychoanalysis of Hindu deities and Hinduism? I was told it's also done for Christianity. And I said yes, but they do not get Best Book of the Award. They are not a tenured chairman of religion department in Ivy League. It is not so much mainstream. It's some fringe group in some third tier, fourth tier college who write all this. It's fine. But this is not given mainstream power and clout, the way it is in India. So I have these 5 waves. There is this Marxism, post-colonial studies, subaltern studies, postmodern studies, and then neo-Orientalism, which is this Pollock era, where they're saying rather than boycotting Sanskrit as a device of Brahmins, therefore we should boycott them, and rather than doing that, we should study Sanskrit, but from the lens of the left. So that we should study it from the lens of the subaltern. So there is a project in Columbia where they bring Dalit scholars after they have finished their MA in JNU and TISS and these places, they bring them, and people study Sanskrit. So the next generation of Sanskrit PhDs from the West who will be sent back to India will be these Breaking India type people, and they'll be getting jobs as Sanskrit. So unko Sanskrit bhi aati hai, but inside their ideology is not, for our civilization. It is to find out flaws, find out that Ram was doing this, so it's a male chauvinist story, this Ramayana and this kind of looking for these kind of things. So the third part of my book project is Where Are the Pandavas? And here I do acknowledge a large number of Indian thinkers in the last 200 years who have done a remarkable job in this area, and there are a large number of them. So, I take them one by one, focusing on a few, to argue that work is no longer state of the art for today. Because when Deen Dayal Upadhyay did it, he only knew Marxism. He did not know post-colonial studies, subaltern studies, postmodernism. He didn't know all that. It hadn't happened. So you cannot say that we'll just glorify him, unki picture dal denge or mala dal denge and we are done. It's not true. Yesterday I was giving a talk at Waves, and after my talk, one gentleman stood up in the Q&A and said that this grand narrative, all you need to do is republish Gandhi's Hind Swaraj and you have the grand narrative. So I said it was a phenomenal book, a very important book for its time. But many of those things are obsolete. He says they're not obsolete. Everything is fine. So I said, for instance, Gandhi, my feeling is if Gandhi were here today, he would update that. Because he wanted to disrupt the empire, and Satyagraha would disrupt the empire's economic sustenance. So if he said, don't buy machine cloth and use charkha at home, it would devastate Manchester, where the machine cloth was made and exported. It would devastate their economy. But today, if you do that, it would devastate Reliance and all the Indian textile manufacturers, because we have one of the biggest textile industries in the world. So today, it would not disrupt the enemy. It would disrupt us and our employment. On the other hand, if Gandhi were here, he would might say something like, today you should boycott Chinese goods. That's more relevant. That's Gandhian. So what is this publishing the Hind Swaraj? You have to write a new Hind Swaraj and you have to critique how are we, through our economic buying power, funding some people who are against us. So that was the Gandhian. To me, Gandhian brilliance on the Satyagraha part is he understood how to disrupt the enemy so that he will not be able to sustain himself. So today the enemy is different and his methods of using us are different, and how we are patronizing him is different. So the mass appeal has to be different. And this is, so our people are so afraid or incapable to do fresh research that the easy cop-out is to say, sir, ye to ho chuka hai. Gandhi ji ne likh diya tha. So another person will say, Deen Dayal Upadhyay ji ne likh diya tha. So mere ko kaam to kuch nahi, aap kyun aise time waste kar rahe hain? So it is like a big insult for a person like me, that after putting in so much effort, you are told that it's all useless because somebody has done it. The Arya Samajis always gang on me and say, wo Dayanand Saraswati ne early 1800s mein likh diya tha. Yehi likh diya, सब कुछ लिख दिया, सब everything is known, सब वहीं है. पुष्पक विमान भी, आप महाभारत पढ़े, उसमें पुष्पक विमान भी हैं, न्यूक्लियर बॉम्ब्स भी हैं, सब कुछ है. तो कुछ मतलब कोई, we have to do no research. We should shut down all our research labs, according to that kind of a thinking. So this a very anti-intellectual posture, which is bothering, I would say. Now, the Kurukshetra, I call it. I use the term Kurukshetra for today's globalization. And the Kurukshetra is no longer no longer a town in Haryana and fields. It's actually the globe. The Kurukshetra is the world. Sara world hi Kurukshetra hai. And so you have to do what Sri Krishna is doing. You have to do a SWOT analysis. You have to analyze kya ho raha hai Kurukshetra mein, who is good, who is fighting, who's got strengths, who's got weaknesses, what are this guy's strengths, that guy's strengths, how to defeat him. That kind of a strategic advice on how to fight in the Kurukshetra, like Sri Krishna is giving, we have to do it for today. So which means we need scholars who are studying the whole Kurukshetra. And they're not just sitting at home. This is where I've had an advantage being outside. I've had an advantage that sitting in the Kurukshetra, I can study what the heck is going on. And have access to all sorts of things, because there is complete open access. I have not felt any. I have not been able to get into the Vatican Library. That Vatican archive is full of Indian material, which the Jesuits took from the Malabar coast, never returned it. a lot of mathematics in it, a lot of astronomy in it. A lot of the history of science and mathematics which traveled to the West is in the Vatican archive. And there is proof that things exist because some of those documents are referenced in other documents. So when they say this document, it refers to another one of the Vatican archive, it's admitted that it exists, but they will not let you access it. So other than a few places like that, I have gone around quite a lot in US and Europe and other places, and done all my data mining for archives, whatever best one man can do. And I have so much, I intend to write 15 books because there's so much material on these kind of things. So the Kurukshetra today is dysfunctional government as far as civilization studies is concerned. I'm sorry. I'm not against criticizing anybody. But I think neither the Culture Ministry has done its job, nor the HRD, nor the Ministry of External Affairs, or anybody else. They've done lip service. They're very decent people. I realize that the job is very difficult. I'm not saying that it's their fault. I think they've inherited a very complex situation, and winning elections is very important for them. Requires. That's our system, and so this is left to the IS people. And the IS people may or may not be sympathetic to all this. Many of them are not. So this depends also on, who. So some are open-minded. So this is not happening. The point is that this is not happening fast enough, and we do not have too much time because we're losing time. So the gurus are not doing this. The ashrams, gurus, some people say gurus karenge. Gurus are doing a limited amount of this work, and in their context of their own sampradaya, their own organization, they're doing that. But a very large-scale, deep study of all this these are huge projects. This kind of narrative project is a huge project. There are no real think tanks of our kind. There are a lot of humanities and social sciences think tanks which are of the opposite kind. But we really don't have. There is no Hindu equivalent CSDS, which is right here in Delhi. And there's such places in Bangalore, or various places you go, there are all these kind of places, where there's serious investment in, scholars. They control a lot of the discourse. So, while the Hindu parties, pro-Hindu groups have been in power for 3+ years, it's not produced output in this way. And then there is a disappointment among traditional Sanskrit scholars. When I wrote the book, The Battle for Sanskrit, I'm actually doing their job. I am critiquing a powerful opponent of the Shastra, traditionally wiping out, completely demolishing the traditional interpretations with this new kind of fashionable interpretation. And none of the Indian scholars knew much about him, bothered to understand it. And then some of the honest ones, see, the not so honest ones were either saying ki we don't care, truth is in my heart, sir, why should I care what he's saying? मेरे दिल में truth है, आपके दिल में truth है, तो वो क्या कहेंगे? And then some complete moron arguments like truth cannot be destroyed, sir. Truth, so dharma को कुछ हो नहीं सकता. Problem is not कि dharma को हो जाएगा. Problem is कि the human understanding of dharma is being manipulated. It is not that if you have agyan, if you have a distorted problem in your head and the youth are being distorted, that is the problem. It is not that the reality itself is being disruptive, but your conception of that reality is being disrupted, and that is causing you to do wrong things. So our people are confused, and these are supposedly brilliant scholars from the tradition. I expected a response from our Sanskrit tradition that, you've really done, some of them were appreciative, that you've done our job because you are able to analyze what these people are doing and respond to it very effectively. But then some honest ones told me, it is not so easy, because if you are a Sanskrit scholar, you've gone through the traditional system, you do not know how to read the Western discourse on Sanskrit. Because the Western discourse on Sanskrit will quote Gramsci and Freud and Foucault and a whole lot of Marx. And you do not expect the Sanskrit wala to have understood any of that. I went to good Sanskrit people. Some of them referred by Kapilji, good scholars, but they said ki it will take me years to even read this book to give an answer. So you see, we have not institutionalized Purva Paksha of West. We institutionalized Purva Paksha in the traditional days, so we were vibrant because we were always on our toes, everyone studying the other and being able to debate, pick up good points and come up with counter arguments. So you understood the Purva Paksha, then you did an Uttar Paksha, then you created your own Siddhant as a result of this dialectic. It's a very brilliant system we had. So now there hasn't been a Purva Paksha Western thought, and they are the dominant ones in our, because of the English language we have, the whole production of that kind of deep discourse comes from there. They control the conferences, the journals, the appointments and whatnot. Even in Sanskrit, I asked a Banaras gathering of very solid traditional Pandits, very honest question, okay, where would you rather have your PhD from? And they all said either Oxford or Harvard or Chicago or Columbia, तो अपनी job बन जाएगी, career बन जाएगा. None of them wanted कि यहाँ से कोई local बन जाए. So you see, we have kind of, I told the British Parliament that, one of the great inventions you did, great innovations you did, was that the East India Company was the world's first and largest outsourcing company. They were outsourcing the management of a kingdom and dozens of kingdoms. कि आप राजा हैं, आपको एलिफेंट पर बैठा के खूब सलूट देंगे, गन सलूट, एंड यूल प्ले पोलो, और आपको बेटे को कैम्ब्रिज भेजेंगे, ही विल बी हैविंग गुड फन, एंड आपको काम नहीं करना, यू आर द किंग सर, वील डू द, आपकी पुलिस हम रन करेंगे, कोर्ट्स हम रन करेंगे, टैक्स कलेक्शन हम करेंगे, सो वील डू ऑल द डर्टी वर्क फॉर यू. आप बिजी आदमी हैं. So this is what an outsourcing success is. Outsourcing is, you go to a rich client with lot of busy kind of work, detailed work, and you relieve him of all that. You take over his resource. You take it over in such a way that he's incapable of ever taking it back from you because he's lost, he's become too lazy, he's incompetent. Most outsourcing clients have very hard time ever becoming independent again because they've given some feature to another person, and that person then can control them through that outsourcing. So I said that actually the British East India Company should be considered the innovators of outsourcing, and they outsourced the Raja's kingdom management. Manage the whole kingdom, end to end. बेटे की मेम के साथ शादी भी करा देंगे, पोलो खिलाएंगे आपको, पोलो खेलेंगे, और आपको क्या, everything we just not, if your life is a series of events, we got the event management contract for a whole life, everything we do. So you see, this is and I will close on a positive thing because time is also an issue and I want questions. So in my British Parliament address, what I told them is that I introduce a new term I've started called soft power reparations. Means that we are not looking for financial reparations. वो तो वो दे नहीं पाएंगे, उनके पास है भी नहीं. And plus it will be an insult and it didn't never happen. Soft power reparations means that India had huge soft power in the world. It was a great economy. It had intellectual clout. And a lot of this was taken away because of disrupting our Iran narrative. The Aryan invasion theory, we should, I told them, here's what my proposal is to them. And they stood up and applauded. This is very interesting. And then they called me to tea. So it was not just for public consumption. They called me and they said, we want to do all these projects. So we are going to start an Infinity Foundation Britain. And we discuss it among our people, and some of the British people will also help us and join us. So my proposal was, you want to know how to get into the hearts of Indian people, I'll tell you what you should do. Next year, April 2019, is the 100th anniversary of Jallianwala Bagh. So you should have a formal event we will organize to honor the people who were killed and set the record straight on what all happened. In World War I, India supplied 1.3 million soldiers, more than any other country. 75,000 were killed and another 70,000 very seriously wounded. So about 12-13% very serious casualty. Some of the most serious battles were fought with Indians. And similar story about World War II. And then I said, if it hadn't been for Indian soldiers, Britain would have lost the war to Germany and become a German colony. So chup ho gaye. And I said, today we will be standing here and speaking German. English mein bhi bhul jao. After the event was over, Right Honorable Teresa Villiers, who's a member of the extended royal family also, and a cabinet minister in charge of Northern Ireland, very important portfolio. She was there, so she clapped. And she said, I'm very intrigued by this idea of soft power reparations. And I really think we deserve, I told her we should have a memorial to the Indian soldiers who fought in World War I and II and saved your country. And it should be right in front of the British Parliament. And she said, we will put this idea. And the other MP who was there for my lecture, he said that his staff is going to work on this, on putting an Indian recognition. So then I said that we should do a conference in London with Indian scholars, British scholars. And its purpose should be to re-examine the Aryan theory, because it ought to be refuted and the British should retract it. And then Bishop Caldwell's Dravidian theory, which is only there if there's no Aryan, there's no Dravidian also. Heads and tails, one exists, the other is also there. So if there's no Aryan, there's no Dravidian, it solves a whole lot of problems. And then I said, we should put on the record the role of Lord Risley in census to fix fossilized hierarchical caste system out of the flexible Jati Varna. And then I said, foolishly, the Indian government took it as a part of the constitution and made it into law, which is our fault. So if I say all this, I'll be called controversial, but if there is a resolution passed in London that these things were done incorrectly, it will have a benefit in India, because that's the way our people are. अब अंग्रेजों ने कह दिया तो ठीक ही होगा साहब. अब क्या रह गया? हाँ, now we are safe. अब तो हम कह सकते हैं. हाँ. So I made a whole list of, and then I also mentioned that we should study India's contribution to the industrial evolution of Britain, because the two products they're very proud of, which other European countries didn't have but Britain had, were steel and textiles. And therefore they created this huge economy, and then other products came later. But these are both Indian products. And many of the bridges and infrastructure using steel in London were using imported Indian steel. This is in the record. Dharampal wrote all this stuff. And this is legendary, how the textiles transfer of knowledge and all that. So I said, there is a lot of unfinished business, and the good news is it costs you no money. You see, because for the parliament to sanction money is very difficult politics. It won't happen. Because it's not the quantity of money, but it's the principle that, we are going to fund all this. But for them to be patrons, to come and lend voice, to pass resolutions, to support us, if we are not asking them for money, is an easier thing to do. So, and they have this burden on their shoulders. Big guilt, sir. And they also, I told them that you will be heroes. If you do this, the Indian people will be willing to have trade with you and relations with you, and you will be respected and so on, because, it's not your fault. You are decent people. That happened a couple 100 years ago by some other people. So you can come out looking very liberal and very, kind of broad-minded. Now, I also told them that in Germany, they teach Holocaust studies. They teach them that we did this is wrong, it will never happen again. And in America, the blacks have demanded that the history of slavery and all that has to be taught. because they want that people should teach this. And the Jewish people want the Holocaust museum here, there, all over the world to keep that memory fresh. The Chinese are full of this blame on the Japanese, कि आपने ये किया था China के. So this is an unfinished business between India and Britain. Now the interesting thing is, the British people, Goras, white people, they had not only no problem, they appreciated that this is a very reasonable. One of them said that it has been a privilege to sit at your feet and hear all this stuff. Now British don't talk like that usually. But they talked. It's on my video. Please watch this. Watch it on YouTube because the whole 98 minutes. If you're on Facebook, we gave only 5-minute highlights, So watch it on YouTube. Now the interesting thing is, I felt, and some of my people there told me, that speech and what you are doing was the culture minister's job. You're doing it. The culture minister's job. Not only that, the people in Nehru Center, London, zero support from them. Zero support. या तो वो डरे हुए हैं, या वो jealous हैं. I don't know what it is. But, Whatever. But the point is, this has been around for 3 years in the new Ministry of External Affairs cannot give that. The point is, it's been with our hands for 3 years. It's very 4 years. It's a very disgusting thing. That right now in this day and age, I go do all this work or give up everything I have done. I can't get even an email response from these guys to help me, even with one little thing, even which it won't cost them any money, even symbolic. Arey tum aa to jate na, kam as kam do something that you can there. So this, so the interesting thing is a very provocative, path-breaking, breakthrough, discussion, proposal, and very concrete. Within a year we do these things, well received by the British, that okay, it alleviates their guilt to some extent. It is also truth and honesty. We ought to do this, we ought to be fair, and it's also a very intelligent and reasonable proposal. Why not? That kind of a response from them, and nothing of support from our own government or our own anybody for that matter. So that's the problem. That I keep wondering that do we really have our act together? Do we really have our act together? And so this is a project in which what I want this book to do is to launch a lot of debate, argument, self-introspection here amongst ourselves. That's what my book project is. And thank you for listening. It's been an honor, and I would love to answer questions. Thanks.
Thank you very much, sir, for sharing your deep knowledge and insights with us. We indeed have a lot to take back from this wonderful expedition of India's Mahakatha. In this magnificent occasion, we are privileged to honor our esteemed chief guest for his valuable knowledge contribution to the society. I now request our respected director to honor our esteemed chief guest with a Himachali traditional shawl and cap and a special IAS memento.
In a few days. What is this? This is a painting of the Rashtrapati Niwas, where they instituted house. So I'll be going there in a few days. Yes. Can I open this?
Yes.
Arey, is where we'll be doing. Very nice. Very nice. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, sir. And that concludes a remarkable, memorable, and knowledgeable event of 22nd Dr. Sarvapalli Radhakrishnan Memorial